Good evening and good morning to everybody. Welcome to this session that we're having at the All Indian Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. This is basically a session on wellness mantras for healthcare workers. Now, many people would argue that why do we need a wellness mantra for healthcare workers, as it's assumed that healthcare workers will be the one who would stay fit. But I think it's important for us to understand that in today's world, a healthy body does not mean that you're well or that you are healthy. And it has to be a holistic approach as far as the mind and body is concerned. And what the last year has brought out, COVID-19 has brought out, is the dire need for a wellness mantra for healthcare workers. We've been talking of this even before COVID-19 about the stress, burnout that healthcare workers face. But I think it became one of the main points that stood out as far as healthcare workers were concerned during the COVID-19 pandemic. Many healthcare workers faced tremendous stress and went through a very tough time. And for us who are from India, it seems natural that we should talk of mantras and look at holistic health, where we look at ways of being able to calm our mind and thereby have a healthy body. The mind-body interaction probably is something which is so strong in our culture, whether it's yoga or it's Ayurveda or so many other things that are inherent to our culture. Yet as we've progressed, as we've adopted a lot of so-called science, which is more Western based, many of these values have got lost. And I think it's important for us to really see how we can look at mantras for the wellness of our healthcare workers. And I think we have two excellent speakers on this, probably world authorities and the best that we could ever have to talk to us on wellness mantras. And for us at the All Indian Institute of Medical Sciences, also a very proud moment, because both of them are alumni of the All Indian Institute of Medical Sciences and have done us proud. So we have Dr. Deepak Chopra, who actually needs no introduction in my mind. He is a graduate of this institute and is the founder of the Chopra Foundation, which is a non-profit entity for research on well-being and humanitarianism, and Chopra Global, a whole health company at the intersection of science and spirituality. And if I may just say that I think this is something where we have really not been able to integrate science with spirituality, and which was something which ancient India had done so well. He is a clinical professor of family medicine and public health at the University of California, San Diego, and serves as a senior scientist with Gallup organization. He's a pioneer of integrative medicine and author of over 90 books published in more than 43 languages, including numerous New York Times bestseller. And I think really he has become a household name in many ways, not only in India, but globally. The second speaker also is a very eminent person, Dr. Sanjiv Chopra. He's also a graduate from the All Indian Institute of Medical Sciences, and therefore, like I said, it's a proud moment for us. He's professor of medicine and serves as faculty dean for continuing medical education at Harvard Medical School for 12 years. He serves as the Marshall Wolf Master Clinical Educator at Brigham and Women's Hospital and co-directs the division of CME at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. Dr. Sanjeev Chopra has more than 160 publications and 10 books to his credit, and is also editor-in-chief of hepatology section of Up to Date. He is a sought-after inspirational speaker across the United States and abroad, addressing diverse audience on topics related to medicine, leadership, happiness, and living with purpose. So we have two very, very eminent speakers for today's session. And I would therefore request Dr. Deepak Chopra, who's going to be talking on reimagining humanity, the future of well-being and technology. Thank you very much, and over to you, Dr. Deepak Chopra.
Okay, sorry. I just said thank you so much, Dr. Randeep Guleria. We have very fond memories of your father as our teacher and mentor. And it was good to hear this morning that he's 93 and active and in good health. And please give him our regards. And this is a moment of great nostalgia for both Sanjeev and me. So thank you for having both of us today. As I look across the human landscape for the last 1 year, it is obvious that globally, humanity has gone through what we can only call grief. And as physicians, we are all familiar with grief. We've seen grief go through all its stages in patients who are immediately confronting their mortality. I've seen people go through the stages of grief in 1 hour in the emergency room. So first, they have a sense of victimization and extreme fear, and then sometimes even anger and hostility, but ultimately it evolves into great helplessness and frustration. And unfortunately, I've seen many people succumb at that moment to death, at the moment that they are extremely frustrated, helpless, and in fear. Once in a while, you find what can only be called acceptance. Acceptance not of the past, because we can't do anything of the past. We can't reenact the past. The future is up to us to actualize. But the present must be confronted factually. And when the present is confronted factually and accepted, then suddenly there is peace. And when there is peace, there is meaning. And when there is meaning, there is actually opportunity in even moments of crisis. So what I'd like to share with you today is that this is, in fact, a moment of opportunity for us to reimagine the human condition and see how we can evolve collectively and individually and socially to a more peaceful, just, sustainable, healthy, and joyful experience, both individually and also collectively. I don't think there can be any social transformation if there is no personal transformation. So with that, I'd like to share with you some recent findings, and I'd like to see the second slide, if I may. The second slide is a recent issue of The New Scientist, which is a science magazine that comes from England. And you can see the title of the cover issue, Your Thinking Body. I was very happy to see this when it came out a few months ago, because 1988 is, I proposed the idea in a book called Quantum Healing, that mind is not located in the brain. Only one aspect of the mind is located in the brain. Mind is in every cell of the body. Now, the subtitle of this cover story is a little misleading, because it says why consciousness isn't all in the mind. It shows that whoever designed this cover was not actually too aware of the difference between consciousness and mind and body. And that is something that I'd like to address today. So consciousness is not in the mind. Of course, the mind is in consciousness, and so is your body in consciousness. The mind is a cognitive experience in consciousness. It's thoughts and imagination and emotions. And the body is also a perceptual experience in consciousness, and a changing experience in consciousness as a perceptual activity. And we give meaning to that perceptual activity, and we call it a physical body. But there's actually, in the deeper reality, there's nothing physical about anything that we call physical. But that's a whole topic that gets to the spiritual aspects of well-being. If I can see the next slide, this is where we are today. Where we are today is that only 5% of disease-related gene mutations are fully penetrant. And let me explain that very clearly. Only 5%, it may be actually less than 5%, 3 to 4% of disease-related gene mutations are fully penetrant. If somebody has that gene, like a BRCA gene, for example, that well-known celebrity Angelina Jolie had, that predicts breast cancer, and rightfully she had a preventive mastectomy, which was the recommendation. For that too, by the way, technologies are emerging, so in a few years we'll see gene editing very effectively, where you can cut and paste a gene in the same way that you cut and paste an email. So you'll be able to read the barcode of a gene, metaphorically speaking, snip the defective gene and insert the healthy gene. But even though that seems like a panacea, it isn't, because, as I said, less than 5% of disease-related gene mutations are fully penetrant. Other gene mutations that give you risk of disease, doesn't matter what disease it is, cardiovascular disease, autoimmune disease, cancer, other gene mutations are influenced by what we call lifestyle. So lifestyle includes the 7 pillars of being, well-being, that I've listed over here in this slide. And so it doesn't matter if you have risk factors for Alzheimer's or heart disease or cancer, even if you have genetic mutations, if they're not fully penetrant, you can modify their expression through these 7 pillars of sleep. So today, everything that I'm talking about is measurable. Sleep is measurable. We need about 90 minutes at least of we need 3 hours every night between dream sleep and REM sleep and deep sleep. In deep sleep, we remove physical toxins. In REM sleep, we remove subtle toxins. In other words, stressful experiences are flushed out through what in Ayurveda we would call the subtle body, the mind, intellect, and ego. And sleep becomes a very important factor in preventing inflammation. So now we also know that in most chronic illness, 95% of chronic illness, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, heart disease, cancer, autoimmune illness, premature aging, many other chronic illnesses, including Alzheimer's, actually all these are connected to low-grade inflammation and low-grade anxiety and low-grade depression. And low-grade anxiety, which is frequently also called free-floating anxiety, because we don't exactly know the cause of it, or free-floating depression, probably existential depression at some stage in life. And low-grade inflammation precedes chronic illness, sometimes by decades. And so it is now also clear that lack of sleep can be a risk factor, probably the number 1 and number 2 risk factor for premature death from cardiovascular disease. So I cannot emphasize the importance of sleep on a daily basis. And I said everything is measurable. I'm wearing a Fitbit right now. By next week, you'll be able to see on Fitbit in India meditations and real-time interventions and help for sleep or stress management or nutrition, etc. As I said, everything is measurable. So the second pillar obviously is meditation and stress management. We talk about stress management, but very few people actually practice stress management, which doesn't have to be only in the form of meditation. Music and entertainment and humor and art are all amazing ways of managing stress, including hobbies and being in nature. But the research now definitely shows that meditative practices, whether it's reflective self-inquiry or transcendence through mantra meditation, or vipassana, awareness of body, awareness of what we call interoceptive awareness of the internal spaces of the body, as in yoga and pratyahara, and awareness of mental space and awareness of emotional intelligence all enhance our well-being through restoring homeostasis and self-regulation. We have a lot of interesting research also now that shows that movement, particularly movement that coordinates mind and body, as in yoga or martial arts, or Tai Chi, or Qigong, and breathing exercises, including pranayama, along with meditation, stimulate very effectively the parasympathetic nervous system. So right now, as we look across the world, it's obviously on sympathetic overdrive. Sympathetic overdrive means that in stressful situations, people are responding immediately with what we would call fight, flight, or freeze responses, or reactive responses. Reactive responses are manipulative ego responses stemming from our ego identity, when we are manipulative either by being nice and manipulative, or nasty and manipulative, or stubborn and manipulative, or playing the victim and manipulative. So between these two responses, the reactive response and the fight-flight response is basically the majority of human behavior. And right now it's expressing itself as sympathetic overdrive, which is COVID storms in young people, and inflammatory storms in basically every acute and chronic illness. So to counteract that, we have a system that we obviously were all educated in, the parasympathetic nervous system. The dominant nerve of that is the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is so called because it's related to the English word vagabond. It's the 10th cranial nerve, and as it emanates from the midbrain, it also influences and interacts with facial nerve and the laryngeal nerve. So it influences everything from your facial expressions to your voice tone, to your body language, to your gestures, to your mood, all being influenced by the vagus nerve, which then interacts with the heart, influences heart rate variability. So if you're stressed, you have minimum heart rate variability. If you're relaxed and transcending, your heart rate variability increases. And vagus nerve also then informs every visceral organ in the body, including all the visceral organs of the abdomen, both the hollow organs and all the solid organs. It pierces the hollow organs and informs the microbiome, which is actually 80% of the serotonin and dopamine and all the oxytocins and neuropeptides, which are immunomodulators, are from the gut. And the gut informs the brain. So there's bi-directional traffic between the brain and the gut and the brain. And vagal tone is the key. And everything from singing to chanting to praying to meditation to yoga to pranayama influences vagal tone. So think of the vagal tone as the healing, self-regulating, homeostatic, parasympathetic dominance, which allows you to rest and recover, and which is what we're missing at the moment in our society. And it is this sympathetic overdrive that is causing not only personal anguish, but collective anguish in the form of violence and war and terror and eco-destruction and extinction of species and poison in our food chain and everything, including climate change. So this is a bold claim, but it is all has to do with human behavior stemming from human consciousness. The fifth pillar that I mentioned here is nutrition, and I can honestly say that as a practicing internist, when people in the past came to me and said I changed my diet and my arthritis disappeared, or my asthma got better, or my autoimmune illness resolved, or my heart disease reversed, I didn't believe them. I had no basis to understand how nutrition could effectively change biological responses so dramatically, even to reverse chronic illness. But now we know that 20 million genes reside in our gut, which are not human, the microbiome, and the microbiome is immediately affected by diet. So if your food is manufactured, refined, processed, has high sugar, inflammatory products, antibiotics, hormones, steroids, then it's all obviously going to cause dysbiosis and interfere with homeostasis and cause inflammation. In fact, now it is recognized that dysbiosis could be the dominant cause for chronic inflammation as well. So the sixth pillar here is called biological rhythms. Anybody who's experienced jet lag knows what a disruption of a biological rhythm is, circadian rhythm. But we have other biological rhythms in our body, including seasonal rhythms as the earth goes around the sun, lunar rhythms, and even gravitational rhythms. So, our body is part of a cosmic harmony. We call it the universe, one song. And so when our body is not in harmony with universal rhythms, that also disrupts self-regulation and homeostasis. And we have been doing research at the Chopra Foundation, along with other foundations, very clearly that if you walk barefoot on the ground, or if you have contact with a tree or sand or the beach, or any process which involves connection with nature, negative ions come from the earth into your body, neutralize the excess free radicals, and restore homeostasis. So we call this process grounding. These are the 6 most important pillars of well-being. I'm leaving self-awareness and self-realization for later in this talk, because that accesses spiritual well-being. These are the 6 pillars of physical and emotional well-being. And I'd just like to share with you that Ayurveda has techniques to manage all these 6 pillars. And the fundamental basis of Ayurveda is simply that we are a microcosm of the universe. If you heard the expression, yatha pinde, tatha brahmande, as is the atom, so is the universe. As is the microcosm, so is the macrocosm. As is the human body-mind, so is the universal body-mind, which we call Brahman. Brahman is the universal mind or consciousness that projects itself as Brahman, which is the universal body. And Atman is Brahman, and since Atman, Brahman, and Jiva are aligned, then we have a balancing of every biological process in our body with the biological process that we call planet or even universe. So I'd like to complete this argument for total well-being with the next slide, which shows some of our work at Gallup. So as a senior scientist at Gallup, we've been looking at well-being in many areas: career well-being, social well-being, physical well-being, financial well-being, and community well-being. And so we find that these are all interrelated. They're all interdependent. Career well-being, 20% of the workforce in the United States is engaged. 80% is disengaged, which means they're unhappy coming to work. And being unhappy coming to work, they make other people unhappy. And of course, the business falters, but there's also a big toll on health, addictive behavior, hospitalization, and so on. So a workplace environment where people complement their strengths, where they are emotionally and spiritually bonded, and where there's shared vision, enhances everybody's career and improves their biometrics as well, and improves the financial outcome of any organization. Purpose-driven career well-being. Social well-being simply means family and friends. Are there people who hold your back? Are you holding their back? Can you trust people around your friends and family to be there for you when you need them? Is there enough, what I call the 4 A's: attention, deep listening, affection, deep caring, appreciation, deep noticing, and acceptance, non-judgment? Those are the criteria for social well-being. And social well-being, of course, is directly connected to total well-being, career well-being, financial and community well-being. Financial well-being doesn't have to do with the amount of money you have. It's about financial security. So over the years, as I've looked at, again, the human landscape, there are 2 categories of people who are actually financially very insecure. The extremely poor, because without money, they're desperate, but the extremely rich, because they confuse sometimes their net worth with their self-worth. So confusing net worth with self-worth leads to distress as well. And financial well-being means generosity of spirit. It means being safe about insurance and having default systems, basically, in case of emergencies. And then community well-being is a spontaneous outcome of that. Community well-being means, are you safe in your community? Are there organized events? What in the Eastern wisdom we would say, seva, satsang, and simran. Seva is selfless practice. Simran is spiritual practice. And sangha is a community. So all the wisdom traditions say, take refuge in the sangha. The sangha is your spiritual community. Take refuge in the Buddha or higher consciousness or higher being, and take refuge in seva. When we combine all these aspects of well-being, we can look at something called total well-being, physical, emotional. So the next couple of slides will show you some of the research we've done in this area at the Chopra Foundation, along with investigators at UCSF and Mount Sinai School of Medicine and UCSD and Harvard, basically looking at genomic expression after a 6-day meditation retreat involving Vipassana, self-reflection, and transcendence, pranayam and yoga and vagal stimulation through breathing and vocalization and chanting. What we saw was increased activity in genes that are responsible for self-regulation, homeostasis, and wound healing, and genes that express heart health, and also a decrease in genes that activate or are implicated in heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, and many other chronic illnesses. So this was a collaborative study. If you'll see the next slide, we also worked with Elizabeth Blackburn, a Nobel laureate at the University of California, and found a 40% increase in telomerase activity in 1 week. This is unprecedented and has been replicated. The studies were published in Nature, one of the Nature magazines, and then replicated in scientific reports. And now these studies have been replicated by many investigators. And it's obvious that what we call metacognition, which means including all the practices of meditation, vipassana, breathing, vagal stimulation, and yoga, absolutely changes our biology, including how we age at a genetic level. So with that, what we have done, may I have the next slide, is started a process, right? No, is that the next slide? Is that the next slide, Dr. Guleria? Can you move forward a little bit if you don't mind? There may be a little sequence saying, move forward a little bit. Move forward. Okay, so go back to where we were. Doesn't matter. So go back to where we were. Where I was is that at this moment, with all that we know, everything is measurable. So as I mentioned earlier, even within the next 2 weeks, I'm collaborating with many companies to show that we can create algorithms for real-time intervention in stress. So if you're stressed, you can stop, you can take 3 deep breaths, you can smile, you can do a short 1 minute or less than 1 minute Vipassana exercise, and in real time you can see your biomarkers being affected, including heart rate variability, vagal tone, biological markers of aging. All these markers are now well established, and where we are right now is creating technology where you could take a selfie, a video, we call it a wellfie, for 10 seconds, and it will tell you everything about your biometrics, heart rate, breathing rate, biological age, on and on. So we've come a long way in our understanding of what we call the mind-body or body-mind experience. I think the two are not different entities, just like space-time is one entity, mass energy is one entity, wave particle is one entity, body-mind is one entity, and there are different aspects of the activity of a more fundamental reality, which we call consciousness. So for the last part of this talk, and I see I have another maybe 10 minutes, I would like to address spiritual well-being and connect it to science if we can. So you may be healthy. Today everybody is looking for good health. Today everybody is looking for longevity, looking to avoid chronic illness, looking to even reverse biological age, looking to see if our body can restore homeostasis so we don't have to die of a disease, but in samadhi. That is the original intention of the great wisdom traditions of Vedanta, Kashmiri Shaivism, Jainism, Buddhism, and all the other major spiritual traditions of the world. So why is that not happening? And I think what we have lost in our reductionist mechanistic science is a deeper understanding of what we call the self. We confuse ourself with our selfies, and having sacrificed our identity to our self-image, we have really lost our spiritual memory. And for that, today, we need the wisdom of the ancient wisdom traditions of India, which has contributed more than any other country to the world, not only spiritually, but culturally. India has never invaded another country through violence. India has influenced the world throughout history, through its culture, through its art, through its music, through its medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, and through its spirituality. So the great wisdom traditions say you can have everything. You can be the happiest person in the world, but one day you're going to get old. And it's inevitable. As I look across and remember all my professors from All India Institute of Medical Sciences, most of them are not alive. So everybody gets old, everybody gets infirmity, and then there is dusty death, unavoidable. So this has given rise to spiritual longing for transcendence, spiritual longing for the emergence of Platonic values and truth, like truth, goodness, beauty, harmony, love, compassion, joy, equanimity, but also the spiritual conquest of what we call death. So these are, in our tradition, they are called the five kleshas that cause human suffering. Not knowing our true self, confusing our self with our ego identity, grasping and clinging at experience which is ephemeral, transient, and ungraspable, recoiling from the same experiences, and the fear of death. These are the five fundamental causes of human suffering. And our great traditions say that all of these causes can be resolved by understanding the first one, not knowing the true self, confusing yourself with your body-mind, and not knowing the source of all experience, which is consciousness, and not finding meaning in perception. So with that, look at this slide for a moment, and I ask you to see a Mexican man with a Mexican hat on a horse, and a sleeping man on the pathway. And as soon as I point that out, that's what you see. But then I ask you to switch in your mind to maybe just an old man with a beard, and now that's what you see. What is there in front of the screen? It's a bunch of colors. And this is how all experience is. It's colors, shapes, forms, sounds, textures, tastes, smells. Perception is not raw experience. Perception is a quality of experience, which we call qualia. When we embed to that qualia, the quality of experience, meaning, then we create perception. And then perception generates emotions, which generate thought, behavior, and action in the physical world. This is what we learn from our own traditions, that there is a level of para, unmanifest, pashyanti, a cloud of probabilities, madhyama, internal dialogue, and then vaikari, speech, action in the world. This is the sweet sequence of unfoldment of the spirit into matter. So now look at the next slide, please, and you will see, again, ambiguity. Are you seeing a woman with locks of hair? Or are you seeing actually two horses against a background of mountains and sky? It doesn't matter. The meaning is given by you to colors, shapes, and forms. All visual experience is colors, shapes, and forms, and all auditory experience is noise. All tactile experience is sensation. When we give meaning to experience, we create perception. Perception generates emotions, thoughts, action, and this is the sequence that we follow if we practice yoga. Raj Yoga, all the disciplines that I have mentioned, Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of love, Jnana Yoga, the yoga of deeper understanding of reality, and Karma Yoga, love in action, because love without action is irrelevant, and action without love is meaningless. But when there is love in action, you transcend karma, it becomes Kriya Yoga. So the next two slides are just pointing something very simple. If you look at the four dots in the middle of this figure, without blinking your eyes for say 10, 15, 20 seconds, try it now. And then you look at the white space around the figure. So look at the four dots without staring. Now look at the white space, and you might see Jesus Christ or Moses or Muhammad or the Buddha. Next slide, please. Similarly, if you look at the four dots on this nose, the colored dots, without blinking for a few seconds, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and look at the ceiling and you'll see the real girl. The point I'm making here is that perception is a learned phenomenon. When you come into this world, you are pure consciousness. You are infinite possibilities. You are infinite correlation. You are unpredictable. You are evolving, and you are self-regulating, and you're full of joy, what we call Satyam, Shivam, Sundaram. That is our inherent state of being. After that, everything is learned, and learned in a way where there is the experience of subject-object split. I am the observer, and that's the observed, and there's a process of observation. In the deeper reality, the observer, the process of observation, and that which is observed are all one inherent pure consciousness, differentiating into modes of knowing, knowers, and infinite things to be known. What we would call the observer, the process of observation, and observe. The knower, that which knows, and that which is known. The seer, the seeing, and the scenery. And when we resolve into that experience in samadhi, then we are holy and we are healed. And that is ultimate spiritual healing. If you look across the board at all spiritual traditions, three things stand out. Number one, transcendence, which means finding your identity beyond the domain of space-time and causality. Number two, the emergence of Platonic truth, goodness, beauty, harmony, love, compassion, joy. And number three, the conquest spiritually of the phenomenon that we call death. Death is the ceasing of perceptual and cognitive activity, but not the ceasing of that which resolves into this activity, which is pure consciousness, which is our ultimate reality, which is Atman, which is Brahman, which is Brahman. It's all one process in one being. And differentiation is not separation. We started this life's journey as a fertilized egg that differentiated into 30 trillion cells, more than all the stars in the Milky Way galaxy. And so my eyes, my brain, my heart, my fingernails, my genitalia come from a single source. So too we, all sentient beings, come from a single source. And when we surrender to that process through yoga, then and only then have we healed ourselves. And once again, today, all this is measurable. So thank you, and on to Sanjeev.
Thank you very much, Dr. Deepak Chopra, for a very, very enlightening talk, if I put it that way, in more ways than one. Before we move on to Dr. Sanjeev Chopra and his talk, I would just like to remind everyone that if you have any questions, then please send them through WhatsApp on the WhatsApp number, which is 9999692364. Let me put that again, 9999692364. And we'll take the questions at the end. We already have some questions, but if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to send it to us to WhatsApp. We'll move on to the second part, which is a talk by Dr. Sanjeev Chopra, and he is going to be talking on the two most important days, reflections on lasting happiness and living with a purpose. Again, something which I think is going to be very, very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. I'm truly honored and privileged to be sharing these reflections with all of you. So this talk is entitled The Two Most Important Days, Reflections on Lasting Happiness and How to Find Your Purpose. I joined the All India Institute of Medical Sciences in 1966, August of 1966. So it was the 11th batch. I met my wife-to-be, Amita Rani, at the All India Institute. We were classmates. Deepak was 2 years senior to us. And Amita and I came to the States in 1972 and have been in Boston since 1973. So we can move on to the next slide. So as I mentioned, I joined in 1966 and graduated in 1971 from the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. Any measure of academic professional success I've had in this life, the foundations were laid by the most amazing, dedicated, brilliant teachers we had at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. Next slide. When I think of India, this is just a short list. I think many of you will have others you would like to add to this list. But I think of Ashoka, Akbar, Maharishi Patanjali, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the spiritual teachers, Mahatma Gandhi, Nehru, the freedom fighters, amazing musicians, economists, movie actors, athletes. Now, in the bottom, you see a young person, Gitanjali Rao, of Indian heritage, 15 years of age, named as Time Magazine's Young Person of the Year. There's so much to be proud of when we think of our amazingly rich heritage. Next slide. Of course, Gandhi is somebody that I think about a lot. I quote him often. I was born in India a year after he was assassinated. But like many of you, we read about him in school. We heard stories from our parents, our grandparents, our uncles. We saw the movie Gandhi. Sir Ben Kingsley got the Oscar. He was asked, what is the greatest role you have ever played? He said, unmistakably, Gandhi. He said, for a year, he practiced, he rehearsed, he fasted, he did the spinning wheel. Gandhi was so masterful with his eloquence. He once said, with every thread I draw, I'm spinning the destiny of India. Ben Kingsley said his record with the spinning wheel before breaking a thread was 7 minutes. Gandhi's was 9 hours. At the end of the 20th century, Time magazine invited readers from all over the world to nominate the greatest person of the century. And it was Gandhi and Einstein. And here's what Einstein said of Gandhi. He said, generations to come, it may be, will scarce believe that such a one as this in flesh and blood walked upon this earth. So much to be proud of, so much to be humbled by. Next slide. When I think of the All-In Institute and the teachers who packed my parachute, again, this is the list that is not totally complete. And I'm not going to read the names, but you will recognize many of them, including Dr. Guleria, the father of the current director of the Institute, Dr. Randeep Guleria. Not only did they impart their knowledge and wisdom, but they also instilled in each one of us a sense of confidence that if we worked hard, we could achieve pretty much anything. I remember a couple of them telling me, sort of casually, said, success is 10% inspiration and 90% perspiration. Sweat it out, work hard, make your dreams, dream big. Next slide. Currently, we are all in the midst of a global pandemic. There is consternation, chaos, and crisis. Dr. Randeep Guleria mentioned this very eloquently in the introduction. Next slide. But there is an opportunity in every adversity. And we can take advantage of that. Rumi once said, the wound is where the light enters you. Let us embrace the wound. Let the light enter it. And we will recalibrate, we will rejuvenate, we will rejoice, and we can flourish. Next slide. Let's reflect on this. You think the lottery winners would be extremely happy. Somebody wins $20 million or $10 million from a scratch ticket that they bought for $4. What happens to them a year later? And all the research has shown that at the end of a year, they're back to baseline in levels of happiness, or they're less happy. Their friends and relatives came out of the woodwork and said to them, how did you get so lucky? You didn't deserve it. Pay off my mortgage. Or they spent it in acquiring expensive objects, gambling away some of that money, and they weren't happy. The only lottery winners who are happy are those who have partaken in meaningful experiences, traveling, expanding your horizons, breaking bread with a friend, and those who have given away a certain percentage, usually 10%, of their newfound wealth to charity. Look at the flip side, one of the worst fates that can befall a human being. Break your neck and become paralyzed for life. What happens to these individuals? This happened to Superman, Christopher Reeves, an accomplished equestrian, taking part in a race, and suddenly the horse buckled, he went flying, he broke his neck, and he's paralyzed for life. And in the first few months, there's always this victim mentality. Why did God do this to me? I didn't deserve it. But next slide, this is what he said less than a year later. I'm not living the life I thought I would lead, but it does have meaning, purpose. There is joy, there is love, there is laughter. He had an amazingly dedicated wife, great friends. He probably had a better appreciation of the sunset and the sunrise than you and I, the birds chirping in the garden, the rustling of the leaves in the backyard. Next slide. Now, Socrates claimed that his wisdom and insights arose merely in knowing that he knew nothing. Prior to him, it was believed that happiness was bestowed upon a select few. Who were these people? Nobility, the royalty, the philosophers, the poets. He said, no, no, no. Happiness can be begotten by human endeavor. And happiness and virtue are inextricably linked. The ancient Greeks did not use the word happiness. They used a term called eudaimonia, which literally translated means human flourishing. Next slide. We can find meaning, purpose, and joy in our lives. To dispel darkness, all one needs is to light a single candle. Let me share with you what I believe are the 4 tenets of happiness. Next slide. So the first trait is happy people have a cadre of good friends. Your friends are your chosen family. I got extremely lucky having the most amazing parents and what an amazing older brother. But I didn't get to choose them. I get to choose my friends. Next slide. Robert Louis Stevenson once said, a friend is a gift you give yourself. Next slide. Khalil Gibran said, friendship is always a sweet responsibility, never an opportunity. Next slide is a remarkable study, the longest study on adult happiness. It started almost 80 years ago. What study's gone for 80 years? The money, the funding dries out, principal investigator passes away, people drop out of the study. Well, this is a remarkable study. And almost 80 years ago, they took 750 20-year-olds in Boston, 250 went to Harvard. The other 500 were from poor, often dysfunctional families. They followed them every year. Detailed questionnaires, physical examinations, blood pressure, EKG, functional MRI, C-reactive protein, cholesterol, home visits. Now, 2,000 of their children are being followed in a parallel study. What happened to that group? It turns out, as of a year ago, 19 was still alive, aged 92 years of age. What happened to that group? Some became lawyers, doctors, CEOs, 4 ran for the Senate. 1 became the president of America. John F. Kennedy was in that cohort. But some became skid row alcoholic derelicts. Some died of suicide. And the major conclusion of the study is that loneliness is toxic. And that your satisfaction with relationships with friends at age 50 is a better predictor of health, happiness, and longevity at age 80, 3 decades later. Better than what? Blood pressure, cholesterol, CRP. So I'm teaching the medical students and junior faculty that when you see a patient, even if you've got 15 minutes, at the end, ask them what they do to celebrate with friends. Point them to this study. You can Google it and watch the TED Talk. Current principal investigator, colleague, Dr. Robert Waldinger, has given a brilliant TED Talk about this. Longest study on adult happiness. James Rohn, a best-selling author, once said, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Let me repeat that. You're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So choose your friends carefully, but celebrate everything good and small with them. Next slide. The second trait of happy people is the ability to forgive. If you hold bitterness or rancor in your heart, you can never be truly happy. Anyone listening, if you're holding a grudge against an ex, a sibling, a parent, a neighbor, a friend, my plea to you, get rid of it. And the moment you make the decision to get rid of that grudge, you'll feel this enormous weight lift off your shoulders. Next slide. Gandhiji once said, the weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is an attribute of the strong. Next slide. I think to me, the prime example of forgiveness, one of the most eloquent, inspiring examples, is that of Nelson Mandela, who was imprisoned for 27 years. And when he's released, he's asked a question, Mr. Mandela, do you harbor resentment against your white captors? And next slide, he answered, I don't. I have no bitterness. I have no resentment. Resentment is like drinking poison and then hoping it will kill your enemies. Next slide. He said, as I walked out the door towards the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison, the prison of the mind. Next slide. The third attribute is a derivative of a quote from Albert Schweitzer. You know, he was a physician, theologian, humanitarian, Nobel laureate, a very humble man. In 1952, he got the Nobel Peace Prize. And at the ceremony, he said, now I have to go earn it. Now I have to go earn it. And he once said, I don't know what your destiny will be, but one thing I'm certain of, the ones amongst you who will be truly happy are those who have sought and found how to serve. Look at our profession, how privileged we are to be serving our patients, their families, in the middle of the night, long weekends, holidays. It's an unbelievable privilege. Next slide. Tagore once said, I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and saw that life was service. I acted, and behold, service was joy. Next slide. In the Rig Veda, it says, he who gives liberally goes straight to the gods. At the high ridge of heaven, he stands exalted. Next slide. So I've broken down these three F's for being happy: friends, forgiveness, and for others. But there's a fourth one, and it begins with the letter G, and it's not God. Next slide. You know it. It's gratitude. Derived from the Latin root gratia, meaning grace, graciousness, or gratefulness, highly prized tenet in all the major religions. And I'm defining gratitude as the experience of something positive gained, but coupled with the realization that somebody else was responsible for that gain. And I strongly believe that gratitude and compassion can be cultivated. One of the ways we can cultivate gratitude, and one of the easy ways to be happy, is to have a gratitude journal. And I'll come back to that. Next slide. Now here's a landmark study. It's called the Catholic Nun Study. So in the 1930s, 118 nuns joined the Notre Dame convent, and the Mother Superior said to each one of them, write down a little bit about who you are and what you're looking forward to. And 60, 70 years later, the researchers could authenticate the handwritings, and they classified them into expressing low happiness or high happiness. And you see the two examples here. I'm not going to read them, except in the second one, you see the words, a very happy one. I would look forward with eager joy. So what happened? They were all 23 years of age when they joined. They're all single. They live in the same convent. They eat the same food. Nobody, to our knowledge, smokes or drinks. And next slide. On average, the nuns who expressed high amounts of emotional positive content lived 10 years longer. 10 years longer. If we had a pill that could make us live 3 years longer, it probably would be $1 trillion pill. This has been duplicated in other studies. Next slide. Now here's an interesting ratio, and unless one's an economist, one probably not familiar with this. Very close to 3. Next slide. This is known as the Lasada Ratio, named after, next slide, Marcia Lasada's research. What it says is that negativity is very heavily weighted. If I say a negative comment to a student or a colleague, I now have to say 3 positive comments simply to neutralize it. And I'm told if I say a negative comment to my wife, I have to say 6 positive things to neutralize it. But this ratio has been found to be highly predictive of success as judged by metrics such as profitability. Next slide, shown in a different scheme. If it's 1.5, the number of positive to negative comments, you're in the danger zone. But you flourish, whether you're college students, nursing home residents, managers, business teams, if you're in the 3 to 6. Interestingly enough, 11 is also danger zone. I don't know what that means. I can only speculate. Perhaps these are people who are manic and they haven't been diagnosed and treated yet. Next slide. Some ancient reflections. Cicero, gratitude is not only the greatest of virtues, but the parent of all the others. Gertner, to speak gratitude is courteous and pleasant. To enact gratitude is generous and noble. But to live gratitude is to touch heaven. Next slide. Now here's a very interesting formula. This is based on the study of monozygotic twins and comparing them with dizygotic twins. And what it says is that 50% of our happiness is the set point. It's like the thermostat in the room. It's genetic. Interestingly, only 10% is living conditions. Whether you live in a mansion in Beverly Hills or the slums of Calcutta or the shanty towns in Joburg, you have a roof on your head and running water, you're pretty happy. And 40% is voluntary action. But this set point is dynamic. Next slide. And you and I know that. We can change that by behavioral cognitive therapy, antidepressants, exercise, which is so good for depression without the attendant side effects of medications, but also very powerfully by expressing gratitude. Next slide. So Robert Emmons is considered the father of modern positive psychology. He's written a wonderful book, paperback, called Thanks, How the New Science of Gratitude Can Make You Happier. So he took a large group, he randomized them. Half of them were told to jot down 2 or 3 things they did during the day before they retired to bed. And the other half were told, before you retire to bed, write down 2 or 3 things you're grateful for. What happened 6 weeks later is that the group who expressed gratitude, that set point for happiness, increased by 25%. So if you don't do it at the moment, I would urge you to take a little notebook, put your name on it, call it your gratitude journal, and ideally, before you retire to bed, write down 2 or 3 things you're grateful for. But, you know, we're so busy, you don't even have to do it every day. Once a week. Let's say Sunday evening, as you're reflecting on what's in store for you the next week, reflect back on what transpired in the last 7 days and write down what you're grateful for. It's a very simple but powerful exercise. Next slide. Now, as I mentioned earlier, meaningful experiences surpass the acquisition of expensive possessions. Here you see a luxury car, a huge mansion, and a beautiful body of water. This is Milford Sound in New Zealand. I've had the privilege of traveling there with my wife, and then you see a charity event. So what happens if you get a brand new car or move into a bigger house? You're probably happy for the first few months. After that, it's a car, it's a house, and you get used to it. This phenomenon is called hedonic adaptation, right? You've heard of hedonism. This is called hedonic adaptation. In contrast, meaningful experiences will give you more lasting happiness. Now, you and I don't have to go to Milford Sound. You could go from the Institute to South Extension and have a cup of coffee with a friend, hopefully when the COVID crisis is over or you've been vaccinated, and reminisce, talk about life, share a story, share a joke. That is much more meaningful. Next slide. Albert Schweitzer once said, success is not the key to happiness. Happiness is the key to success. If you're happy, you have better interpersonal relationships, you sleep better, you're more creative, you're more fluent in your speech. All that leads to success. Thich Nhat Hanh, Vietnamese monk in his 90s, once said, there is no key to happiness. Happiness is the way. Next slide. Now, this is John Lennon. Many of you, I think, appreciate or like the music by the Beatles. So John Lennon, one of the Beatles, age 5 goes to school. And the teacher gives the kids an assignment. Write down what you want to be when you grow up. Next slide. He writes happy and hands the paper to the teacher. And the teacher says, John, you did not understand the assignment. And he looks up at the teacher and he says, and you don't understand life. It's a 5-year-old. His mother every night when she tucked him into bed said, John, when you grow up, I want you to be happy. I think if you want to hear some amazingly astounding things, talk to your kids, your grandkids, your nieces, your nephews, young people. I've done this and I've encouraged many people in the audience when I've given a talk on happiness to do likewise. Next slide. And I just offer you here 2 examples. The first one is from one of the deans at Assumption College in Massachusetts. So I gave a talk there. It was very well received. And as people are taking notes, I often mention, you don't have to take notes. You can use my slides. The organizer will give them to you and you can modify them. You can adapt them. You can use them. You don't have to give me attribution. I call it copy left. Anyway, one of the deans, she wrote to me 5 days later, Dr. Chopra, I went over your slides with my husband, but I took your cue and asked my 5-year-old daughter, what is happiness? And my daughter answered immediately, Mommy, happiness is when my heart feels bigger. I gave surgical grand rounds at the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center on the topic of happiness and living with purpose. And the program director wanted to have coffee with me the following week and talk about life. And we sat down. He said, Sanjeev, I have a son. He's 2 years and 10 months of age. And I asked him, what makes you happy? He said, Daddy, I'm most happy when I'm sharing my toys with my friends. So I think the modern day philosophers are children. There is so much wisdom, so much we can learn from them. Next slide. But happiness is more than the sum total of happy moments, right? I talked about friends, forgiveness for others, and gratitude. The key to sustained happiness is finding your purpose and living it. Next slide. One of my favorite quotes is from Mark Twain, who once said, the 2 most important days in your life are the day you're born and the day you find out why. Each one of us has a singular purpose in life. Next slide. Now, defining your purpose can come by reflecting on it. Or sometimes there is a key moment in your life. That moment itself is often stark, it's negative, it's harsh, but it's momentous. And if you have the passion and the grit and the love and the fortitude to say to yourself, this is unacceptable, I'm going to try and make a dent here, I'm going to try and make a difference here, and you start doing it, that can be your purpose of life for the rest of your life. Next slide. Most of us will experience sorrow. When you experience the abyss of sorrow and emerge stronger and with a clear purpose, you will have triumphed. Next slide. The Buddha once said, every life has a measure of sorrow. Sometimes it is this that awakens us. Next slide. Now, the person you see on this screen, surrounded by these beautiful children, is Jaime Aramillo. He's a national hero in his country, Colombia, hence the term Papa Jaime. I met him at a leadership course that Deepak was running at Kellogg School of Management some 12 years ago. And I consider Papa Jaime as a person who inspires me every single day with the life he leads. He's about 70 years of age. When he was 28 years of age, some 42 years ago, he's standing at a street corner in Bogota, and across the street there's a sewer. And in the sewer, there's an underground city, hundreds of these orphans, with garbage and human excrement. They live there. And a 7-year-old girl emerges, beautiful girl, and she's looking at him and smiling. And he's thinking to himself, I got to do something for these kids. As they're having this interaction, a car comes around the corner, stops in the middle of the street. Window rolls down and somebody tosses a toy. The car recedes. This girl has never possessed a toy. She comes running up to the middle of the street, picks up the toy. She's looking at Jaime Aramillo and beaming with joy. And as they're having this interaction, a speeding truck comes around the corner, smashes her into oblivion. And he says to himself, this is it. This is my calling in life. I'm going to adopt these kids. He has adopted, housed, schooled, and fed more than 52,000 orphans. National hero, Papa Jaime. So I said to him, Papa, how do you pay for this? He said, Sanjeev, I have a bakery. The only thing we make is cookies. I've convinced all the restaurants in Bogota, Medellin to have a cookie jar next to the cash register. As people are leaving, paying their bill, they grab a cookie. There's a shoebox with a slit. They drop change. I get 50% of my needs that way. I said, what about the other 50%? He said, I'm a motivational speaker. I speak all over Latin America, and I plow the honorarium into my foundation. So I said, Papa, come on, that doesn't cut it. I know what motivational speakers get. He smiled. He says, Sanjeev, you're right. Every time I need money, out of the blue, somebody helps me. He says, 3 weeks ago, I needed $41,000 to pay my bills. So I go to 3 banks and they turn me down. Papa, we love the work you do. You already got loans with us at the lowest rate. Don't even tell anyone, but we can't give you more. So he's coming back to his office and there's a street woman. She recognizes him, crosses the street and gives him a hug. Papa Jaime. He says, are you hungry? Come to the office. So she's sitting in his office having coffee and cookies. He's on the phone calling 3 other bankers and she can tell that he's being turned down. She looks at him, smiles, says, Papa, how much money do you need? He says, Sanjeev, I told her I need $41,000. She smiles and says, I give it to you. He said, Sanjeev, I said to myself, she's cuckoo. She's a street woman. How come she has $41,000? She opens a purse. She has $60,000. Her son had sent her the money to get off the street, sign a piece of paper, and move into her house. She says, I'm okay. The weather's good. I've saved some other money. You take it now. You need it. Your children need it. You can return it to me if you want, when you want. So that kind of thing happens to me all the time. His children have grown up to become computer scientists, lawyers, teachers, physicians, surgeons, professional athletes. He showed me the photograph of a young man dressed in impeccable white with a tennis racket, flanked by Pete Sampras on one side and Agassi on the other. National junior champion of tennis, country of Colombia, one of his orphans. And many of them are giving back to the foundation. But he found his purpose in life almost 50 years ago, witnessing the death of that beautiful 7-year-old girl. Next slide. Joseph Campbell, very spiritual individual, public broadcasting service in the USA had a series. Bill Moyers interviewed him. You can probably watch it on YouTube. The Power of Myth, a hero's journey. And he once said, follow your bliss and doors will open where there were no doors before. Next slide. Now here's a remarkable individual by the name of Abru. He died recently. He was an economist. And some 35 years ago on a lark, he took 9 poor kids off the street and taught them classical music. Next slide. This program is subsidized by the Venezuelan government. It's called El Sistema, the system. There are now 400,000 children in Venezuela performing classical music. A few years ago, a troupe performed in Vienna at the Philharmonic. And the critics said, this is the performance of the year. Now there's a similar program in LA, in Boston, in Scotland, in Greece, in many countries. The person you see here conducting is Gustavo Dudamel. One of his products, El Sistema. At age 27, he became the conductor of the LA Philharmonic. He's considered one of the most celebrated conductors in the world. So Brew found his purpose in life with an experiment, taking 9 kids off the street, and now 400,000 in Venezuela. 90% come from impoverished families. They'd be in drugs and gangs or even dead. Remarkable story. Brew, a few years ago, there were 2 individuals honored at the commencement at Harvard University. It was Brew and Oprah Winfrey. Next slide. Now here you see 5 things on the screen, 5 statements. I should have said I love you more often. I should have had the courage to pursue my dreams and aspirations. I should have traveled more. I should have been the bigger person and said I'm sorry. I should have spent more time with my friends. Who says these 5 things? You know it. These are people in hospice facing imminent death. This is a nurse who interviewed about 1,000 people. And you'll see nobody said, I should have worked harder. I should have lived in a bigger mansion. I should have belonged to 3 country clubs. I should have driven a new Ferrari or a Tesla every year. So the point is, next slide, we should be doing this now. None of us should have any of these regrets on our deathbed. Next slide. This is Gitanjali Rao, 15 years of age. A wonderful interview by Angelina Jolie in Time magazine. When she was 8, she told her parents, I want to figure out a way to decontaminate water so that there's no lead. She did it a few years later. She has addressed cyberbullying using artificial intelligence. Very eloquent and a remarkable young lady. Again, so much for us from India to be proud of. Next slide. Now I'm going to finish by telling you the Starfish Parable. Some of the stories of Papa Jaime, even Gitanjali Rao, others a brew can appear daunting, but we can all make a difference. This is a story of a young girl walking on a beach where there are 10,000 starfish stranded. She picks one, twirls it, throws it into the ocean, does the same. There's an old man sitting in a rocking chair, smoking a pipe, reading a book. He says, young lady, come over. What are you doing? You see that 10,000 starfish stranded here? Look across, there's another beach. Probably 15,000 starfish stranded. Do you think you're making a difference? So she bends down, picks a starfish, twirls it, throws it into the ocean, turns to him, smiles and says, it made a difference to that one. We can all make a difference. Next slide. We have again so much to be proud of. I live in New England from my home in Weston, just about 5 miles away. There's a town called Concord, and the transcendentalists like Thoreau, Emerson, they lived there, they worked there. And here's what Henry David Thoreau once said. What extracts from the Vedas I have read fall on me like the light of a higher and purer luminary, which describes a loftier course through a purer stratum, free from particulars, simple, universal. It rises on me like a full moon after the stars have come out. One wise sentence is worth the state of Massachusetts many times over. Next slide. So let me share with you my purpose in life. Next slide. My purpose in life is to fulfill my dharma, to teach medicine, teach about leadership, about happiness, living with purpose. Next, to do it grounded in humility and with an ardent desire to learn every single day. Next slide. To express gratitude to my family, friends, colleagues, students, and patients who inspire me in countless ways. Next, and in some small measure, inspire everyone I meet on this amazing life journey. Next slide. I invite you to reflect on what gives you the greatest joy and resonates for you. Take a few minutes now, later, reflect on your purpose, write it down. You may wish to share it with your closest family members and your chosen family. It is my fervent hope that you have found, or you will find, your purpose in life, and living it will light up every day of your life. Thank you so very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for an excellent talk and really setting the tone of what life is all about and the purpose of life, especially for the generation of today where we become more materialistic than in the past. So we have a few questions, and if you're willing, I would just request you if you could take some time out to answer them. I'll start with Dr. Deepak Chopra because there are a number of questions for him. The first one is from a doctor who says, is there scientific evidence or a tool to measure the influence of spiritual well-being on physical, mental, and emotional state of health?
Yes, so we have a paper out last month in the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine, which addresses just this, how non-dual experiences improve biomarkers and biometrics, both measurable at the level of gene expression, inflammation. Sanjeev mentioned gratitude. We've also looked at gratitude and inflammatory markers in chronic heart failure patients who were double-blinded. One group kept a gratitude journal and took the same medication. The outcome was drastically different.
Thank you. The next question is basically saying that we're living through a technological revolution. Science has changed so much. In this age of technology really taking over our life, how are we going to be able to reimagine humanity in today's time?
Very good question. We are reimagining humanity right now. And one of the things is technology. So I'm holding in my hands this recent paper called Reimagining Humanity. And it reimagines humanity in 5 areas: technology, food, transportation, energy, and materials. And this is where technology comes in. Technology is neutral by itself. If you do multitasking, it ruins your neural networks, also is as harmful as any addiction, including cocaine addiction. But if you're mindfully aware of what you're doing during technology, it actually restores homeostasis. So you have to use technology mindfully and not with a scattered brain. Technology is neutral. You can destroy the world with it, or you can heal the world with it. You can give somebody a dopamine hit just by sending them an emoticon on the internet.
Correct. So I think it's how you use technology that is more important rather than blaming technology.
Correct. We are the creators of technology, not its victims.
Correct.
I'll make a quick comment on that. Is that one of the hottest topics in medicine right now is the use of artificial intelligence. I don't even call it artificial intelligence. I think a more appropriate term might be augmented intelligence. And we can use that. And, you could be a radiologist and have seen 10,000 mammograms. But with AI, you could incorporate 1 million. And it's going to pick up more accurately. Skin lesions, colonoscopy, looking at a polyp, incorporating AI. So this is hyperplastic. Leave it alone. Don't even submit it for pathology. Or Barrett's esophagus, upper GI endoscopy using AI. This is fine. This one has dysplasia. Take 18 biopsies. And at the end, it'll be cost saving. So technology can be used, but human beings will still have a major role.
Yeah, that's true. So the next question, I think, is for Deepak Chopra, which is something which, since he touched on sleep, how much sleep does one need for wellness?
Ideally speaking, 8 hours. I monitor my sleep every day, and I make sure that I do 8 hours. As we grow older, it is about between 7 to 8 hours, of which 30% should be between REM and deep sleep, because they have different effects on the body. But that's ideal.
Okay, the next question basically is on, you touched upon inflammation. So a lot of data now, especially during the COVID and subsequently, really raised this issue that inflammation in the body really is something which causes more harm. And there has been a lot of focus on diet to decrease inflammation. And you mentioned upon the microbiome also. And this is something which people have looked towards Ayurveda to be able to have a diet to decrease inflammation. So the question says, how can we measure inflammation in a healthy individual to say how much is it affecting that person, and what is a good diet to decrease inflammation in the body?
So the best diet is a diet that has maximum diversity of plant-based foods, because they provide what we call phytochemicals. Phytochemicals are micronutrients that are extremely important for self-regulation. Also, maximum diversity of plant-based foods. And if you eat meat or chicken or poultry, if it comes organically, not with the interference of a factory farm, that could be healthy, and it will change your microbiome within less than 6 weeks. So we do that, and Sanjeev mentioned artificial intelligence. We use AI to look at the microbiome and inflammation. And some of the markers are, of course, CRP, but also these days homocysteine. And there are other inflammatory markers, which are all proteins that are being measured. So it's very obvious that we can measure inflammation. And yes, it is linked both to acute and chronic illness.
I'll make a quick comment. There is one common drink that is consumed 2.25 billion times a day, and that drink is coffee. And coffee has amazing health benefits: low risk of 7 common cancers, type 2 diabetes, cognitive decline, Parkinson's, cirrhosis. Recent study in JAMA Oncology that patients with advanced and metastatic colon cancer who drink coffee had improved disease-free survival. Coffee drinkers have low levels of CRP, TNF-alpha. They have high levels of plasma adiponectin. Low levels of plasma adiponectin are linked with aggressive liver disease. And coffee drinkers have longer telomeres. Deepak talked about telomerase and telomeres with meditation. Here's the fascinating thing. Increased caffeine intake is linked with shortened telomeres. Increased coffee intake is linked with longer telomeres. It's not the caffeine. If you drink Red Bull, energy drink with a lot of caffeine, you'll probably die 8 years sooner. So coffee is truly a miracle drug. None of these studies have been sponsored by Nescafe or Starbucks. They're published in peer-reviewed journals. 5 studies now in the New England Journal, Annals, JAMA, Lancet. Men and women who drink coffee have lowered all-cause and disease-specific mortality.
Right.
Change the microbiome.
Thank you. There's another question, and this is from an MBBS student at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, and he says, what is circadian rhythm and how important is it for wellness? Please make me understand this at an MBBS level, as I am an MBBS student.
Okay, so there are 4 biological rhythms. The most well-known is circadian rhythm, which is the 24-hour cycle of night and day. So at different periods of the day and night, you go through different psychobiological cycles. Certain times you feel hungry, certain times you feel sleep, certain times you feel energetic, etc. Balancing of biological rhythms is achieved through grounding. Any connection with nature balances your biological rhythms. Any physical contact, with the tree, with the earth, with the ocean, with the forest, with even the breath of the atmosphere of nature, balances circadian rhythms. But then we have other rhythms, seasonal rhythms, as the earth goes around the sun. So you've heard of seasonal affective disorder, which is called SAD syndrome, where people have depression in winter because of the light being less. And in this country now, they have circadian clocks and circadian lighting, etc. So seasonal rhythms, and then there are gravitational rhythms as a result of the effects of gravity, sun, moon, and stars in the earth. But, they apply to us because we have an ocean inside us. 65% to 70% of our body is water. And then there are lunar rhythms. What is interesting, fascinating, is Ayurveda has rituals to balance each of these rhythms. There are seasonal rituals, there are daily rituals, and the cycles of day and night, and the seasons, and the tides, and the gravitational rhythms are classified as Vata, Pitta, Kapha, and actually combinations of those. So when you understand those rhythms, you understand how biological clocks operate. 2 years ago, the Nobel Prize went to the discovery of biological clocks. And even that finding is a minuscule of the knowledge of biological rhythms that we have in Ayurveda.
Thank you. The next question is from another doctor who says, and this could be for both of you, what is the future of medicine and how to channelize it in the right direction? Is mind medicine the way ahead?
I'll let Sanjeev answer first.
Actually, I've just finished writing a book on how to flourish in your medical career with Pankaj Vij, who is 20 years my junior and also a graduate of the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, and he works in California. So we can go into medicine and we can go into clinical medicine, we can become researchers, we can go into public health, we can be innovators, we can be speakers, we can be authors. There are so many ways in which one can flourish in this medical career. I think the ones amongst us who think we are fortunate are the ones who don't think of medicine as a job. Your work can be a job. It can be a career. For many of us, it is a career, especially as we're advancing from instructor to assistant professor, associate, full professor. But the final one is when it's a calling. And if you feel you're going into medicine is your calling, then you'll be happy and you will flourish.
That's true. I think that's the most important issue, that whatever career you choose, you must look at it as a calling rather than something that you have to do. And I'll just follow this up with a question.
I'd like to add just one thing on the future of medicine, and that is a change in vocabulary. You know, when we train, we are said you're going to be a practitioner, which immediately sets the mind that I'm going to practice medicine. You're not practicing medicine. Also, you treat patients. I think we need to go further. The future of medicine is the alleviation of human suffering. And when we do that, we shift to just mechanistic approaches to all the things Sanjeev has talked about, gratitude, love. And we look at actually the biological expressions of that. Limbic resonance, what's happening in the brain, what's happening in biomarkers, what's happening in inflammation. So I think the future of medicine is not reductionist. Reductionism is less than 5% of medicine, and holism is 95% of medicine.
That's true. So I think it's very important for us to understand that medicine is more than just a career. It's calling, it's a commitment. And if you have that commitment, then treating your patients is not just the medication that you give, but the empathy that you have with your patient, the connect that you have with your patient. And that is why, as has been said, that, if you have that empathy, even without drugs, you could really heal your patient. That is the most important thing, which I would say the younger generation needs to understand. We've moved a lot into investigative medicine, and we've forgotten the art of medicine, which is all of this, but which is very, very important. And I think that is something that we need to remember. And since we're discussing this, go ahead.
I just mention something. There's Justice Louis Brandeis from Boston once said, a profession has three major attributes. The first one, there's a specialized body of knowledge known primarily to its practitioners. The second, it is done more for the benefit of society than for personal gain. And the third one is that society in turn confers upon the profession great autonomy. We make the rules. How many years of medical school, residency, fellowship, recertification, etc. One of my mentors, Dr. Dan Federman, the first dean of CME and a brilliant endocrinologist, added a fourth tenet. He said in the medical profession, there has to be an encompassing moral imperative. And I've taken the liberty of adding a fifth one. And the fifth one is that learning is a lifelong privilege. I would say to everyone listening in the medical field, put your head on the pillow tonight before you go to sleep and ask yourself, what's the one new thing I learned today? And you'll probably be able to answer it. Something brand new, something new, or a nuance of something you already knew. There is no other profession where you learn every single day. It's an amazing profession.
That's true. I think the art and science of medicine and the way it's changing is learning, and every patient teaches you something or the other. So you learn from your patients also. I'll go on to the next question, which is basically two questions combined in one. One is, of course, saying that we talk of children being very happy, but when they grow into adults, they lose that trait of happiness, which is very simple as far as children are concerned, but it becomes very complicated as far as adults are concerned. And the second question is, how does one teach resilience in such a fast-moving pace to toddlers and teenagers?
So the answer to the first question, by the way, is when Sanjeev showed his slides, the happiness formula. And the first thing is the set point in the brain. The set point in the brain is determined through something which biologically, physiologically, we can call limbic resonance. So when a baby watches its mother or its parent, it's looking at eye movements, tone of voice, facial expressions, body language, and gestures. And if the mother or the caretaker is giving attention, appreciation, affection, and acceptance, there's what we call limbic resonance. The baby grows up to be a happy person. If, on the other hand, the mother or the caretaker is complaining, criticizing, playing the victim, or condemning, then the set point is in the other direction. At the set point we changed, and Sanjeev showed some slides where he said, yes, gratitude and other practices can change the set point. So children are naturally creative, curious, and full of wonder, and then we bamboozle them with human constructs. That's what happens. The second part of the question, maybe Sanjeev can answer.
I would say we need a lot more research on this field of happiness. Denmark is often considered amongst the happiest countries in the world, year after year after year. Now, what are some of the reasons? They work 35 hours a week. They have free healthcare. They have free education. They also partake in a phenomenon called hygge. Hygge is cozy, convivial gathering. If I'm in your neighborhood, Randeep, I don't pick up the phone and call you and say, are you home? Can I drop by? I simply ring the doorbell. And if you're in Denmark, you say, hey, Sanjeev, come on in, sit down. And you sit by the fireplace, you drink hot chocolate, and you shoot the breeze. But then I learned something amazing about Denmark about 2 years ago. Between the ages of 6 and 16, when you go to school, every week there is a 1-hour mandatory class on empathy. So you go from 6 to 16, 10 years, let's say you go 30 weeks a year, 300 hours on training on empathy and compassion and having tolerance for your fellow human beings. Denmark, a few months ago, opened the first museum on happiness. I think you mentioned burnout. I don't even like to use the term burnout. I think it's moral injury. Some of it is system-induced distress. And we can bring joy and meaning back amongst our colleagues and amongst our students. I would urge you in your leadership position to consider starting a happiness institute as part of the institute and do research. And then we can move forward.
Thank you. That's a brilliant idea. I'll just go on to the next question, which is from a doctor, that in your experience, what has been the effect of COVID on neuropsychological behavior of healthcare workers, and how can one come out of these smoothly? So this is more related to COVID.
I'll answer that a little bit because I'm very involved right now in mental well-being, suicide prevention, and depression, particularly amongst young people. Suicide has now become the second most common cause of death amongst teenagers. Last year, more people died of suicide in Japan than of COVID-19. And yet across the board, you see varying responses. So what we did at our foundation, we created a non-profit division of the foundation called neveralone.love. Check it out, neveralone.love, www.neveralone.love. And we created an AI bot that can speak to anyone who's feeling anxious or depressed. Within 10-15 seconds, this AI bot, who we call PV, she can assess whether you're depressed or risk for depression and intervene. And now we are creating a cryptocurrency and blockchain to pay for it. So democratizing well-being across the world. And already our AI system has intervened in, I think, close to 1,000 suicide attempts. And there have been over 1 million conversations just with the AI. What is really ironical, unfortunately, is people are more comfortable talking to an AI than a human being because they feel less vulnerable. So this is where we are today, the combination of technology and intervention in real time.
Right, thank you. So I'll go on to the next question, which is, please give me a short highlight on the epigenetic clock. Can lifestyle medicine reset it? I am a GP from Calcutta.
Epi means above. Epigenetics, above the genes, is a sheet of proteins called histones, and there may be other proteins. And these actually are modified through any experience, mental experience. Right now we're having a mental experience. We're having a conversation with each other. The frontal cortex is being activated as a result, and genes are involved. Genes are involved in setting up neuropeptides, neurochemicals, and firing of neurons and connection of neurons, etc. So every experience is actually changing the body-mind. Doesn't matter if it's an emotional experience, a conceptual experience, a perceptual experience. Experience is metabolized in consciousness as the physical body. That's the basic tenet, by the way, of Vedanta and Ayurveda. So in Ayurveda, there's an expression. If you want to know what your experiences were in the past, look at your body now. If you want to know what your body will look like in the future, look at your experiences now. And experience is what we call karma. So this is the imprint of karma, and transcendence is the correction of that. And it's all biologically explainable. So this is such an exciting time to look at spiritual science.
Correct. So the next question is that, you showed that increased telomerase activity occurs due to meditation. So is there data that actually leads to aging, and does it lead to healthy aging rather than just increasing age itself?
We don't know. We will have to wait for long-term studies for that. I have to say, though, I'm 74 and I'm experimenting with myself, and I see the effects, both biological and through biological markers like blood pressure, heart rate variability, inflammatory responses, vagal tone, biological age, etc. But we need long-term studies. Right now, we don't have them.
Okay, so this is another question which I'd like to ask, and this is something that there is a lot of debate in our medical profession right now, and that is what the Indian Medical Association calls mixopathy. So there is a feeling that we need to develop, and especially among those physicians who go in for practicing general medicine rather than going in for specialized neurosurgery or other specialized departments, they could also take an extra course on Ayurveda. And would that help in better quality care in India? Because there is a lot of focus that we should try and have Ayurveda also as a part of the allopathic medicine to provide holistic treatment to our patients, because it has to be a patient-centric approach rather than, let's say, a pathy-sensitive specific approach. So there are two things that one is looking at. One is,
go ahead, finish.
One is, this is something that I've been sort of thinking, that could we look at, let's say, an elective course at AIIMS, which could say that you could choose an elective course which could be on Ayurveda and yoga while you do your MBBS as an elective. For those who are interested to take up that, or it could be part of something that is done as an extra degree, and then you're allowed to practice this, especially if you're going to be practicing as a physician. So just your thoughts on that.
So, Dr. Guleria, I have been very involved with Ayurveda both in India and in the Western world, and also in East Europe and Russia. And Ayurveda is a very big movement, as you know. Unfortunately, the term you use, mixology, has confused a lot of people, and even Ayurvedic practitioners these days. They prescribe in the same way as what we call regular doctors. Instead of giving you an antibiotic, they give you an herb, or give you this, or give you that, shatavari or ashwagandha or whatever. So mixology is a problem. I think what we need now is a whole health medicine integrative of best practices and evidence. That is the most important thing. It doesn't matter if it's Ayurveda or Chinese medicine or Occidental medicine or, what we call allopathy. We need evidence for what works, and whatever works, we should implement. Having said that, I think the personal practice of yoga and lifestyle as prescribed by Ayurveda and meditation will help you as an individual become a better healer, irrespective of what kind of practice you have.
So I think that is important, but the challenge is how do we really get it implemented in today's time when you're right. When we talk to Ayurvedic doctors, they don't want it to go in. They feel threatened by the allopathic doctors.
That's Dr. Guleria, that's politics. Over here at UCSD, where I have a faculty position, and now at the University of Central Florida, we've already started integrative education for medical students, residents, and fellows in what we call whole health medicine. And we are developing the data, and we are bringing in Ayurveda, but we're bringing in energy medicine, we are bringing in complementary medicine, we're bringing in anything that works. And this is a movement that is spreading here in many medical schools and many institutions. And I'm sure this will happen everywhere where there's academia because students are demanding it.
I hope so, because we still are trying to move in that direction, but I'm finding it difficult.
I like your idea of having an elective in Ayurveda, possibly getting a donor to fund all of it, and getting the best practitioners of Ayurveda as part of the faculty teaching that course, to make sure that if we are using Ayurvedic medicines, that they are not contaminated with lead, with mercury, with corticosteroids. That's been one of the issues. So there should be the same stringent criteria. You know, if I go and pick up Tylenol, acetaminophen from one pharmacy or the other, I know exactly what it is. It's 500 milligrams of acetaminophen, but we don't know. With herbal products, sometimes the active ingredient is 7%, sometimes it's 93%. So standardization, funding, research, but I think it's an elegant idea to have an elective and then see what happens and then follow them for years. I talked about the Harvard grant study, 80 years. We follow these people who graduate and what happens in the first 10 years after they graduate and go into practice, and compare them with physicians who didn't get that elective. Patient satisfaction, outcomes, prevention of diabetes, control of high blood pressure. There's so many things that could be looked at, but it needs a concerted effort and needs funding.
Yeah. Dr. Guleria, at our foundation, we've also been looking at Ayurvedic herbs like Shatavari, Ashwagandha, Trikatu, Triphala, Amlaki, and we're looking at them in their pure form in cell biology labs. And what we're discovering is that there are different kinds of adaptogens. So we have published now several monographs on Ayurvedic adaptogens, which are now housed at the National Library of Medicine in the US for anyone to see how Ayurvedic medicines act at a cellular level, at the level of molecular biology and gene expression. So all that research we've done and it's published. However, Sanjeev mentioned the problem with contamination, which is happening. Also, the potency of these herbs is also decreasing because of the destruction of the microbiome in the soil through fertilizers and other contaminants. So if you go under the surface of the earth, let's say in Amazon or rainforest or maybe some parts of Himalayas that are not contaminated, 1 teaspoon of soil has more genetic diversity than the entire planet. So the gold mine of genetic information is under the soil and in the sea, in the depths of the sea, resurrecting this microbiome, looking at how this affects plant life, animal life, human life, is actually even the key to understanding climate change. Because climate change is change in a biosphere, and the human body and all biological organisms are an expression of the biosphere and vice versa. They are entangled. So as we begin to understand this great wisdom of the Ayurvedic seers, they were real rishis. They were not looking at active ingredients. They were looking at biosynergy and a holistic mechanism for restoring homeostasis. And each of these Ayurvedic medicines actually have a very, very specific way to help cell biology adapt to stress at a molecular level. But the contamination is an issue at the moment.
That's true. That I think is an issue which sort of concerns everyone regarding contamination. So there's an interesting question, and this is with the societal structure in India generally encouraging social interactions. Is it better to stay in India or go abroad after MBBS to be happy? What is your take on that?
Sanjeev.
I think it's a very individual decision, and that it's okay to come abroad and get your postgraduate training and then decide, what is my calling? What will make me happier? Will it be practicing or being in academic medicine in the United States, or going back to my country of origin and contributing to the wellness of the population? Years ago, I hate to bring this up, but if you were from the institute and you graduated and you went back, I don't know if it still exists, you became a pool officer. And promotion through the ranks was based on seniority, not meritocracy. That, I'm told, has totally changed now. And that there are chairmen of departments, there are deans, there are directors, there are division chiefs who are in their 40s. So that's wonderful. So that opportunity is there now, which didn't exist 45 years ago. So I think it's a very individual decision, and you need to try it out.
Yes, things have changed, but not everything has changed, and we still need to go a long way to have a change which will really be more effective. So we're running out of time. I'll just take two questions. One is, and both are from AIIMS family. One is, generally speaking, ideal body weight is linked to happiness. What is your point of view on that?
Ideal what?
Body weight.
I think it correlates with health. And I think it correlates with energy and sleep and all of that. Body weight is a good signature. Yes.
And also correlates with the microbiome. And we're learning so much about the microbiome and the link between the gut and the mind. There is a psychiatrist in Ireland. He's coined the term psychobiome. There is a study now of 18 young people with autism and one stool transplant. 2 years later, the microbiome has remained reverted. There's been marked improvement in GI, gut symptoms, and neurological symptoms. So it's being used. We know that the effect of chemotherapy, side effects of chemotherapy, dictated by the microbiome. You know, there is the fruit fly, which has 70% of its genetic material identical to human beings. And if you give the fruit fly a herb combined with a probiotic, 70% increase in longevity. So I think one of the hottest topics in medicine, microbiome.
That's and true. We are studying the microbiome with Ayurvedic herbs as we speak.
Everything is now linked to the microbiome as of today.
It's been called the second human genome, the inner bacterial rainforest, a newly discovered organ. It aggregate weighs 3 pounds. It made it to the cover of The Economist. So it's the hottest topic. I told the last dean at Harvard Medical School, actually the current dean, I said, you've got 17 institutions affiliated with Harvard Medical School. You've got 15,000 faculty. Harvard Medical School should have a microbiome man and medicine institute. He said, Sanjeev, funny you should mention it. Yesterday I had a meeting with all the department heads and the deans, and I asked them, do we have enough bandwidth to start an institute? And they said, absolutely. Get them all together.
That's great. There is this whole issue of having a human microbiome project like the Human Genome Project. So let's see how that moves forward. I think it's important, and just finishing that question on ideal body weight. There's data which suggests that even if you're obese or your weight is high, the adipose tissue itself promotes inflammation. So it would also lead to a more inflammatory response, which itself has its negative effects. So before I ask both of you to give your take-home messages, I'll take the last question, which is from a final year MBBS student at AIIMS. And that student says, what were your mantras to keep yourself happy and energetic during your undergraduate life at AIIMS. So he wants your advice as a final year MBBS student.
Yeah, my mantra was playing a lot of cricket and a lot of table tennis. And I'm not boasting, but I got the best cricketer award and I won the table tennis championship many, many years in a row. Singles, mixed doubles, lucky doubles, all of it. And then having a brother to look up to, 2 years senior, that was my happiness formula. And having a cadre of the most amazing friends, a short number of 4 or 5 friends who bilkul kehte hain na, jigri dost. So I'm a liver specialist. You know, the seat of the soul is the liver, not the heart.
So my response, my mantra is go with the flow, take it easy. Life is very short. I'm 74, going on 75. Every phase of life has a chapter and an ending. And when you look back, it is all a dream. You know, Wittgenstein, the great German philosopher, said, our life is a dream. We are asleep. Once in a while, we wake up enough to know that we are dreaming. So my mantra is wake up, period.
Thank you. So before we really finish, any take-home messages or final comments that you'd like to give to our audience? We'll start with Sanjeev and then go on to Deepak.
I think my take-home message would be happiness is a choice, and that you can achieve happiness and you can flourish in life by those 4 or 5 things I talked about: cadre of good friends, forgiveness, doing things for others, expressing gratitude, and then finding your purpose and living it. And I talked about some examples of how you can find your purpose. Here's another easy way to find your purpose in life, if you already haven't found it. Take 30 3x5 cards. And for the next 30 days, at the end of the day, jot down 4 or 5 things you did during that day. And give it a rating from 1 to 10, where 1, you were miserable, and 10, if you were lucky, you were in bliss. Then at the end of 30 days, line up those 30 cards and strike off everything. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6, 7, 8, 9 resonated for you, gave you joy. Your purpose is lurking in there. You can find your purpose there. Deepak?
Sanjeev spoke about empathy. So the sequence of emotional well-being is empathy. When you feel what another feels, there's limbic connection, resonance, empathy. You feel what another feels. That spontaneously arouses the experience we call compassion, which is the desire to alleviate suffering, which then leads to love and action. This is the sequence. And in the Buddhist traditions, we say these are divine emotions: empathy, compassion, love, kindness, and joy. And so if we focus on these divine emotions, we not only heal our emotional and intellectual and mental body, the subtle body, the sukshma sharir, but we also heal the physical body, the physical body, which is the projection of the subtle body, which in turn is the projection of the causal body as we understand it in Ayurveda. So divine emotions, empathy, compassion, love, action, joy, forgiveness, gratitude is the key to everything.
I want to mention one other thing. Deepak talked about the importance of sleep. Many of us believe in affirmations. And many people get up in the morning and say, today will be a great day. I will succeed. I will do this. I will be happy. I will flourish. That has some value. But if you say the affirmation at night as you're falling asleep, there is now science to back this up. Studies published in Nature and in Science magazine. We have a brilliant person in our hospital at the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, Robert Stickgold, a full professor at Harvard Medical School. And he's done some amazing research. So here's an affirmation that I share with family and friends and teach in a happiness course. And it's very simple. And you say this affirmation at night as you're falling asleep. I expand in abundance, success, happiness, and love every day. I expand in abundance, success, happiness, and love every day and inspire others to do the same. The inspire others to do the same is not out of arrogance. It's like, if I have a gift or a talent, I must share it. Voltaire, the French philosopher, said, every man is guilty of all the good he did not do. Every man is guilty of all the good he did not do. So if you have a talent or a skill, you must share it. But saying an affirmation at night as you're falling asleep, very, very powerful.
Thank you very much. I'd really like to take this opportunity to thank both of you. You really had a very enlightening talk, from the several pillars of well-being to the purpose of life to the role of Ayurveda and how it's so important, and how we, and some people say it's because of our colonial past, that have lost a lot of Ayurveda, which was our tradition for many, many centuries. And then, of course, the importance of happiness. Life is all about being happy, and that's what really counts at the end of the day. So thank you for all your divine thoughts and processes. Really grateful. And do stay connected to your alma mater. We look forward to having more interaction with you. Thank you very much for taking time out.
Thank you, Dr. Guleria. Thanks.
Thank you, and have a great day. Thank you very much.